A very warm welcome to all of you here in the room and to those in the virtual room who follow us from the screen. This is the second kind of hydrogen conference that we have in this residency, and we are very glad that we are able to bring that about. That was started by our predecessor, Anna Prinz, and again this time it was headed by Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Höfker, who are here now behind the technique. So thank you for that. We have two big topics for two sessions of about 45 minutes each. The first one is how hydrogen can transform industries. The second one is even on a higher scale, how it can transform geopolitics. And both subjects already clarify that they have a very strong link to two subjects which are very pressing on our hands today. The one of absolute topicality, the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and the second, which might be the challenge for a whole generation, how we can deal with climate change. We are very grateful that you join us here from science, from politics, from business, and some great colleagues here from the European Union ambassadors here in Stockholm. And if I say we, then just let me say a few words about who is us, those in the German embassy who have worked for this conference. I'm half of the ambassadorship. We are doing that as a job sharing with my wife Christina, so you shouldn't be astonished if you find a different picture on Twitter from April on, so it's another 3 days. This is the fourth last day. And then I've already mentioned Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Höfker, and we have widened that even for our press officer, Mrs. Blomqvist, who will have the first interview with Mr. Kaufmann, and then Boris Gerke, our deputy, who will then have the second interview with Gauri Singh. We have thought about how we structure the day. I said it's two subjects. So it will be quite dense, and therefore for all of us, especially for myself, the request is to be crisp and short and clear, and therefore we should already now start with the first introductory interview in our first session on how hydrogen will change and transform industries. And our main speaker here is Stefan Kaufmann. He's the German Innovation Commissioner for Green Hydrogen of the government. You've been that already in the last legislature. You chair as well the Federal Committee on Education, Research and Innovation of the Christian Democrats and have been in the German Bundestag for the last 12 years. You've been quite a few times already in Stockholm. You are traveling a lot because hydrogen makes you travel. You try to bring about new networks and structures, and therefore we are really grateful that you made it to Stockholm today. And then we have to my left Gökçe Mete from the Stockholm Environment Institute. She's an expert on energy sector and a qualified lawyer, and as well the honorary head of the academic engagement of Women in Energy, Climate and Sustainability Foundation. And then a bit farther to the left from me, Henrik Henriksson. You have as well an impressive CV, being 6 years the CEO of Scania, and then saying you want to even go to new shores and make a vision again the main center of your life, starting with H2 Green Steel, which is really amazing, and we are honored and proud and grateful that you take the time to be with us here today and to share your vision with us. So without more ado now, it's to Clarissa and Stefan Kaufmann.
Yes, I would like to put a couple of questions to you that I'm sure everyone in this room is interested in. Green hydrogen is considered key for the energy transition. Germany's national hydrogen strategy was adopted in June 2020 under the former government. It was then part of the coalition agreement of the new German government of Social Democrats, Greens and Liberals. Could you please take us through the last developments and main objectives of the hydrogen strategy?
Yes, also the strategy of the former government was very ambitious to become climate neutral in 2045, and we spent a lot of money for that, 9 billion euros. And the new government now updated the strategy in the coalition contract. So the plan is to increase the production of green hydrogen in 2030 from 5 gigawatt to 10 gigawatt, for example. We have also now a look on blue hydrogen for our transition period, which was not that clear in the former coalition. A much stronger impact on the international corporations, for example, stronger cooperation with the other European countries, for example. So these are some of the main topics, but the update will be made during the year. So I think in autumn 2020 we will have a really update of the strategy. Now we have what is written in the coalition contract.
Mm-hmm. And it may be too early to say, but what has been achieved already?
Yes, for example, we have around 20 energy partnerships of the German government with a lot of countries. We extended it to hydrogen partnerships, for example, with countries like Nigeria or Saudi Arabia, or countries we have these energy partnerships. And then we spent some of these 9 billion of euros already. For example, in my ministry, the research ministry, we started 3 flagship projects for 700 million euros of funding. For example, the offshore production of hydrogen on the seaside, that is 100 million project. And we have a 100 million flagship project on transport questions, how to transport the green hydrogen via shipping or via pipelines. And we have a 500 million flagship project to the production of the green hydrogen, to ramp up all technologies of electrolyzers we have, because we want to become a global leading market of hydrogen. Also, we spend a lot of money now for new infrastructure, for filling stations for hydrogen, for example, or some funding schemes for the purchase of buses, for example, in local communities. So. A lot of the funding is now in announcements. And then for sure we have these 2 billion for international projects. 900 million of it is for ℏ2Global. And another 400 million we have an announcement for international corporations in hydrogen for all countries out of the European Union. And we have another 400 million funding for the research ministry. And that's what we are doing, for example, in agreement with Australia or Namibia.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned ℏ2Global. I think it's a double auctioning mechanism. Could you explain how it works?
Yeah, at the end, the idea is to have long-term purchase agreements with countries. They are able to deliver green hydrogen or its derivatives, and we will secure a fixed price for them. And on the other hand, we will look for the market here in Germany. And the difference between the purchase price and the price for selling it in Germany, that will be funded by this ℏ2Global mechanism in an annual auction.
Mm-hmm. Germany is phasing out both nuclear energy and coal, and on top of that, now the war in Ukraine has strengthened Germany's and other countries' need to become more independent of gas and to speed up the use of fossil-free alternatives. What does this mean for the production and need of green hydrogen?
Yeah, on the demand side, we have we need really big amounts of green hydrogen. We have, for example, our biggest steel plant in ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg. They have a need of 750,000 tons of green hydrogen a year to produce green instead of grey steel. And that's why we really need a lot of production capacity, not only this 10 gigawatt now for Germany. We have the goals of the European Union now, which means 2 times 10 million tons of green hydrogen in 2030, 10 million tons in Europe and 10 million tons out of Europe. But that means around 200 gigawatt of hydrogen production capacity, electrolyzer capacity. At the moment, we have globally 1.5 gigawatt capacity a year. So you see, this is a really big challenge to achieve this 250 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity in 2030. And that is one of the bottlenecks we have. We have to have the companies producing the green hydrogen, alkalic or PEM electrolysis or high temperature electrolysis. And that's what we have to build up now worldwide, the production capacities.
And how can that be done? I mean, how can countries like Germany be able to cover this increasing demand and at the same time push the production of green hydrogen forward?
We have to finance the ramp up for sure with public money, but we have also to incentive private capital. At the end, it's a question of how we'll pay for for all these capacities. So we spent our 9 billion for the moment, but we know that we have to spend much more money, also in Germany, but we need the same in Europe and worldwide. So that is a really big challenge. So our H2 Global, for example, is one of these ways we try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at import. The great future demand for hydrogen-based energy sources in Germany cannot be covered by domestic production alone. So what are the measures needed to secure the green hydrogen supply in the future?
Yes, we need strong international corporations. That was also what Minister Habeck is doing now. He was traveling to Emirates last week, for example, to look for hydrogen partnerships, to have special agreements with special countries. I think we have this H2 Global mechanism, which is open for everybody to apply, but we need special partnerships with special countries from whom we know that they can deliver us with green hydrogen. And such countries like maybe Sweden or Ireland, or we have this agreement with Australia, or we have agreement with Namibia. All of these countries could be some possible suppliers of green hydrogen or its derivatives in the next years.
So how are you working towards establishing new partnerships?
Yeah, for example, we have for African countries, for example, we have an H2 Atlas. So we looked on the production capacities of over 30 West African countries, and we see that the production capacity of West African countries is 165,000 terawatt hours of green hydrogen. So that is a big potential, but then we have to look closer. The governance structure, the workforce, and so on, the water supply, and all these things. So, and then for sure we're looking to Southern Africa as well. We have this agreement with Australia because they have wonderful conditions with a lot of sun, and so we have to see for long term and also for midterm and short term delivery. And for sure, the Gulf states and the MENA states are very interesting for a shorter period of delivery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because they have infrastructures, there's a lot of money, they have experience in producing energy and transport energy.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Sweden. Let's take a look at partnerships with Sweden. 25% of industrial CO2 emissions in Europe come from steel production. With technologies here in Sweden for the production of green steel using hydrogen, Sweden has taken a leading role. What does that mean for hydrogen partnerships with Sweden?
And that's a very interesting question, because I talked about ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg, for example, and if we want to produce green steel instead of gray steel, then we need in Germany really a lot of green hydrogen. I talked about 750,000 tons only for ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg. That means 7 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity only for this one steel plant. And that's why we have to discuss the question, what will happen? Make it sense to bring all the green hydrogen to the steel plant, or make it maybe more sense, at least for new steel plants, to produce the steel there where we have the cheap renewable energies. And that's what will happen, I think, for example, here in Sweden. You have a lot of renewable capacities here. And maybe the industries, maybe the new industries will change there where we have the cheap energy. Mm-hmm. And that's why also this H2 Steel is a very interesting project, maybe also for cooperation between Germany and Sweden. Mm-hmm. And for sure, there are a lot of capacities for renewable energies in Sweden. So, and if we're thinking about pipelines from Sweden to the northern part of Germany, could also be interesting to produce the energy and the hydrogen in Sweden and bring it via pipelines to Germany.
If we look at the costs of green steel, for example, which is quite high, what are the incentives for the industry, let's say for a company to shift to at least to more expensive production, at least in the short term, using green hydrogen? So how can businesses survive the competition with companies that haven't changed to green energy?
Good question. Around 10% of the global steel production is in Europe, all of Europe. The rest is outside of Europe, India and China, for example. So we have to discuss this question, but on the other hand, there's no alternative. If you want to become climate neutral in 2045, the steel has to become green. Otherwise, the steel industry will not exist anymore in Germany. And that's why we're talking about contracts for difference, for example. For this difference, so like an OPEX funding instrument. We think that the green steel at the beginning is more than 30% more expensive than grey steel, and somebody has, in a way, to pay for it because the market won't do it at the first in the first years. So that's why we're talking about carbon contracts for difference, for example.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for right now, but I'm sure we have more questions later in the panel. And I would ask you, participants who are here or in the virtual room, to raise your hand if you would like to be part of the discussion, and then we'll invite you to speak. So thank you very much, and back to Ambassador Bertler.
Thanks to both of you. And before we can respond then to raised hands, the floor is to Gökçe and Henrik. I think that Mr. Kaufmann has already alluded to many issues that you will dwell on. I think for us as laymen, one big issue is always the question, can we make it in time? So how much space do we need for windcraft? Do we have the speed? Something like H2 Green Steel is a big factory needing energy in time, so you need a roadmap and the energy has to come by then. So the floor is first to Gökçe and Henrik, but if you give us some positive answers on these questions of space, speed and money, then that would be already a very hopeful day that we have today.
Well, okay, let's start. I think it's a tricky question, but let me start by saying I actually represent, alongside those, I have many titles, but I represent also the Women in Green Hydrogen network. I'm co-founder of this network, which is a network of over 600 women, female experts working on hydrogen. And I'm also head of secretariat of the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. This is an initiative led by India and Sweden, and we bring together 16 countries, including Germany, and 19 heavy industries, including ThyssenKrupp, Salzgitter, Hybrid. So with that hat, I'll be speaking to you today. Indeed, many things need to come together. Of course, we have supply and demand. Quite rightly, electrolyzer capacity is nowhere near. The cost needs to come down, technology needs to improve, but at the same time, of course, costs are quite impacted by the cost of renewable electricity. And we'll hear this afternoon more about that. Those costs are not the same everywhere in Europe, also globally. But the Russian invasion on Ukraine, from the first figures I've seen, indicate that this has impacted actually the cost of grey hydrogen. As natural gas prices increase, cost of grey hydrogen is increasing, making it more competitive with green hydrogen already. But despite that, we have scarcity of hydrogen today. So demand side, of course, matters, but it also matters that we use hydrogen where it makes the most economic sense. And those are the areas where we absolutely cannot decarbonize. Because from a cost competitive perspective, in the energy sector, hydrogen is inefficient. For heat pumps, electric vehicles will take over. So heavy industry is definitely where we see hydrogen as a no-regret option, with still being the holy grail for hydrogen, really. We have a green steel tracker. I recommend you check it. We've looked at all the steel projects around the world, and we see that several major steel companies have, by have committed to switching to direct reduction of iron technology, some of them directly using hydrogen, some using natural gas in the interim to switch to hydrogen in the long term. But long term, I must say that most companies actually have commitments by mid-2020. So that's quite important to note. And indeed, in Germany, steel sector is the highest CO2 polluter. And direct reduction of iron technology, we'll hear more about that, is a known technology. We are already using it, but what will be also an issue here is again, scarcity of hydrogen. So there are alternative ways. You can build your own electrolyzer through vertical integration, which is the H2 green steel route. Or otherwise, you can have also source it in the market. But the risk is if you can't find it in the market, and that's a question I always have in mind. Will we see companies moving to places where renewable energy is cheaper? That's a big risk. And also, we need to think about, does it make sense to import hydrogen, or it makes sense to import products produced with green hydrogen? So it's something to think about. But what I would like to actually close with is policy. So we have seen the hydrogen strategy of EU make a huge shift. So that one strategy that came about 2 years ago now has really had an impact on investments. So giving policy predictability is crucial. But everything needs to really happen at the same time, and it makes even more sense for us to rethink about hydrogen economy at the current crisis. Multiple things need to happen at the same time, as I mentioned. So we need to regulate transport, but also look at cost of transport, cost of pipelines as well, storage regulation, unbundling regulation, support schemes like carbon contracts for difference, and they need to be harmonized. We still don't have standards or certification schemes. And of course, there's still issues around taxonomy and the carbon border adjustment, because of course that's another risk that companies in Europe might lose out in the market if we don't do that. So those all things need to happen at the same time, and it needs to happen in a harmonized way, which we already see differences across EU in different national hydrogen strategies. So I'm hoping that where we are today will put more emphasis on that, and we can see these things moving together. But overall, I see growth in hydrogen demand in steel sector, and we are working with heavy industries within the leadership group for industry transition. And we will convene again at the Stockholm Plus 50 in June. So I hope many of you can join us if you're in Stockholm.
Thank you so much. Quite a lot of information in 45 minutes. And I hand over to Henrik.
Yeah, so I think a brilliant keynote address here with maybe a new challenge as well coming online with security aspect of energy, considering the war in Ukraine. And I think that is requiring that now more than ever, Europe needs to stick together, and we need to go back to the principles that form the European Union and think about how we protect our single market and our unity. And based on that, I think we also need to address the energy transition. We should not see it as countries, we should see it as a region. And when we do the transition, we need to look at where do we have the best conditions to do different things. And where do we have the speed to be able to do the transformation in the most efficient and the most both cost efficient and time efficient way. And therefore, I think that has been indicated before, I believe that looking at using the renewable energy to produce green hydrogen, when that is for heavy industries, like, for example, steel, I believe that that should be primarily concentrated in those areas where you have access to renewable energy, and not only renewable energy, but plannable renewable energy. The importance of having something that means that you can run your industrial operation 24/7, 365, which is not only relying on wind and solar, then you need a balancing power like hydro, or if you believe in nuclear. That's where you should do the heavy lifting for this transition. Therefore, I think, for example, in the steel side, instead of importing iron ore to a steel-making nation like Germany, you should import green iron, where you have taken the energy from regions where it's renewable and spent most of the effort in reducing the CO2 footprint, which you do in the process before you do the steel, which is when you produce the green iron. And then instead of importing iron ore to a country like Germany, you import green iron. That's, I think, the idea of 𝐿𝐾𝐴B, the Swedish mining company, for example, that they have in their vision, which I think is brilliant. That way we would maintain the industries, the knowledge, the assets that's been invested, all the competence, all the customer sort of qualification that's already been made by these brilliant steel companies in mainland Europe. We would maintain majority of the jobs. The only thing that needs to happen is investments in a new technology, an electric arc furnace. And then use the scarcity of the renewable energy, unfortunately at double the cost like we have, for example, in northern Sweden, to transform the steel production. And I think that would be, from a holistic perspective, a European holistic perspective, would probably be the quickest, answering your question, and the most cost-efficient way to transform the steel industry. And I think the less painful as well when it comes to job creation. That way, I think we would be able to also make a smooth transition for people working in this industry. The other remark I would like to do is also that when we are now pre-selling our green steel as we speak, that is possible to get a buy-in from our customers. And we're talking about some 25 to 30% more expensive than the brown steel. But the interesting thing is that 100% of our customers who sign contracts, they are companies with science-based targets, which means that they have committed themselves on scope 1, scope 2, and upstream scope 3, which means that they already know what is the value if I source green steel, green aluminium, green plastic, green rubber. As a previous CVO of Scania, I know what that was in the truck, and I know how much we were willing to pay. And those 30% is an easy go, because there is a willingness for the customer of ours to be willing to pay for that. And it's not 25% on the bill of material, which I think you understand. It's more, sort of much more when you look at the cost of the fridge, or the passenger car, or the bridge, or the building. So the market is there today. And the willingness to pay for that transition is there today. So I think it's more a matter of making sure that we prioritize where do we do different things in Europe that is energy intensive and connected to the green transition and the green hydrogen.
Thank you so much. And at least on one part, the market is there. That was a very hopeful message. I would still have the question then, if you look at your own enterprise, if you think that the energy will be there in time, will the grid be there in time? Is the bureaucracy, are we up to it to furnish what you need to make this kind of dream happen?
Yeah, very relevant question. So our plan is to start customer production in 2025. So it's 3 years from now. It depends on getting our environmental permit. If we do that on a normal procedure time in Sweden, it should be possible to keep that timeline. So that's number one. Number two would be the access to renewable energy from wind and hydro. That's available in the region. It's available at the right type of cost for our business case. It's available on long contracts. But the grid, I think wherever you go in Europe, is a challenge. How do you get the capacity? We're talking about the connection of somewhere around 1.7 or 1,700 to 1,800 megawatt in the plug point to the grid. To get that sort of capacity, you need investments, and that also takes time. So that, of course, is one of our challenge. But with the permits on that side, it is also in line towards 2025. So, but those are the main challenges: the permits to get the environmental permit, and the permits to build the power stations and the grid connections. Then after that, I think it's just grit.
Okay. Back to Stefan Kaufmann. listening to Henrik Henriksson, it sounds a bit like a win-win. So half of the production goes to where the hydrogen is, but the steel plants can still function. And we have Dr. Redenius from Salzgitter, I think, as well in the audience. So is that smooth? And will it need a kind of European allocation? Will it be market-driven? And is there competition necessary? And will countries like Germany in the end face difficulties because they had a lot of production in these fields, but they don't have the right amount of wind and photovoltaic to then feed the steel furnaces as before?
Yeah, exactly, that's the problem. So, and I very much agree what you said, because that's why I said we have 10% worldwide of European steel production. So, and it really makes sense to work together in between Europe with all the steel factories, steel makers, to have a common idea. But on the other side, okay, we have a steel strategy also for Germany, and for sure we tried, this strategy tries to hold the steel industry and the working places in Germany. So, so we have to look what we can do together. And what you talking about, that makes sense. I also talked about, does it make sense to produce the steel there where the renewable energy and the green hydrogen is cheaper than in Germany? And you know, we will never have the capacity to produce these amounts of green hydrogen we need for our industry to produce it in Germany. So we are talking about 10 gigawatt now. But I talk also about ThyssenKrupp Duisburg, 700,000 tons means 7 gigawatt. So 10 gigawatt is, yeah, and then we haven't produced synthetic fuels or whatever. So, and that's why we have to talk with our European partners, and if that makes sense, what you're talking about, to have a common approach and maybe to shift part of the industry then.
Okay.
I think we can see already now an interest from European steel makers in the surplus of sort of green iron that we have in operation, and also for foundries, for example, for engine manufacturing and so on. But I think this combination of doing it with a European perspective is the right way.
Okay. I just reach out. Are there any questions from the web or from the Christian Danielsson, please?
No, I was interested what Henrik said, because did I understand it rightly that what we call iron sponge would be the production in where you are located, so to say, and that it would be the iron sponge that would be exported to the steelworks in Central Europe? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So what we are doing is that we're setting up our own production of green hydrogen, producing our own green HBI or green iron sponge for our own sort of use. But there is a surplus, and of that we can of course use for smaller sort of industries that would like to use that as well. It would not be able to supply the Thysens, if I put it that way. But then LKAB has announced a plan to produce the green HBI as well, and export that instead of exporting iron ore pellets, which they do today, or iron ore. And I think that would be the right strategy then going forward. You can say that then the export from Sweden would not be renewable energy. It would be green iron. And the import to Germany in this case would not be green hydrogen, it would be green iron. It doesn't take away the need for green hydrogen. But I think that would probably be the most optimized, in our view, at least system view for a European perspective.
A little bit similar discussion with Australia, for example, by the way. Also importing coal or from there, and there's also a starting discussion, maybe doing the same in Australia and import the sponge than the hydrogen. So.
Yeah, please.
The same can be done also in South Africa. South Africa also is a big mining producer, and they have already a steel decarbonization strategy that they're working on. Same in India now, we're engaging with a steel decarbonization strategy. But I just wanted to add one more thing, because you asked me to speak about positive things, and I think being a researcher, I always look at the problems. But perhaps two things I could mention on the demand side. There are two initiatives that are quite newly launched at COP26. And that's quite important for global demand. One is the First Movers Coalition. It's a US-led private buyers alliance that has several Swedish producers, SSAB including in the group. So this is and they will come up with a target for private procurement of green products, and that will of course also drive demand and help reduce costs. And the second is green procurement. So that's also another area we need to work on, also across the EU. We don't have a mandatory green procurement policy anywhere, but this will also help drive demand for hydrogen produced products. But there's a new initiative also, again, at the global level, led by actually Germany, UK, India, and several other countries. It's called the Industry Deep Decarbonization Initiative. So there's an alliance of countries that will come up with a set of targets for green procurement. So that will also hopefully change the market dynamics and help with demand.
I also want to add one sentence what you said about the market. And I also think that there are already customers, companies, they are willing to pay higher prices for green products because the clients, customers are also willing to pay a higher price maybe for a green car produced by green steel. So that's why it's interesting what you're telling about your customers.
And you spot, and I think many of them are already marketing their car, their fridge, as a carbon-free product, but they are paying certificates at €100 per CO2 tons to offset it. So.
And now I've seen that we have another question from the room. Please, if you could.
Sure.
So from the Green Party.
Yes, Member of Parliament. Thank you all for interesting remarks. A question to Dr. Kaufmann. 10 gigawatts is really impressive, obviously. Is that all green hydrogen? And in that case, how do you compare it to the capacity of grey hydrogen in Germany 2030? Because I guess that you don't want that much green hydrogen in the future. So, and also just a short note on the question. It's a good thing that Henrik said that we should export the iron instead of renewable energy. But on the other hand, we have the capacity of great amount of offshore wind in south of Sweden, and that is obviously big potential to export renewable energy to Germany. So just a question.
But I learned about Sweden that you have the same problems than we in Germany. You have a lot of capacities in the northern part of Sweden, but the demand on the southern side, and it's also not easy to bring the energy from the northern part to the southern part of Sweden. So that's maybe a similar problem. Now, talking about 10 gigawatt in 2030, that is really green hydrogen produced. The hydrogen strategy is really focused on green hydrogen. So we won't fund production of blue hydrogen, for example. And if I'm talking about blue hydrogen for transition period, it's only for import blue hydrogen from Netherlands or Norway. But we won't fund the production of blue hydrogen in Germany. It's really green hydrogen. So produced by offshore wind. That is the realistic option.
Henrik?
Yeah, I think that we have this challenge in Sweden that we have landlocked power up north, and we can't get it south. But I think that we will solve part of that by creating industries up north, and then sort of refine the commodities and send that further out on export. Yeah, I think that's the strategy.
Okay. There's no further question then for me to wrap it up. Again, we have some colleagues from the European Union here. We had Christian Danielsson from the Commission. So what you're describing now, which looks quite close between Sweden and Germany, the outlook on hydrogen. If you look at then more on the European landscape, is that already a consensus? I guess that some countries will have different speeds. Do you feel You said we have to have a common European approach. We have to see how to best allocate, and this decision might be even taken then by all of us together, and not necessarily the market. So do you see a mechanism how Europe can work in that regard together, or do you see a kind of competitive approach with quite a difficult time to go through for the European Union, to all of you? But you might.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different approaches in every country. So I've been to Hungary last two weeks ago. Their aim is to produce 250 megawatt green hydrogen in 2030. So, and I've been to Prague last week, and also France. They want to produce hydrogen from nuclear energy, for example. So we have very different approaches and different Geschwindigkeiten, different speeds, and we have for sure different demands on hydrogen in the several countries. We have countries like Spain and Portugal who wants to produce green hydrogen to export it. Also Ireland is very interesting because they have a capacity of wind energy of 70 gigawatt, and they only need 10 gigawatt for their own decarbonization. So that's what you have to look, how many of the renewable capacities the countries need for their own decarbonization strategy. And there we see very different pictures. But
and do you see a need for more coordination, or is that already happening and it just takes some time?
What we tried now, for example, in the German presidency, we started a European research agenda. All European countries work together to look for the research topics, for the common research topics. That is one approach, but for sure, at the end, every country has, at the moment, a little bit their own strategy. And then we have the taxonomy and the regulatory framework, and we have to look to certify what is green hydrogen. That is very difficult for the moment, and the business, the companies, they wait for the regulatory framework from Brussels. That is that is not that easy at the moment. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes, I think there are a few opportunities. Of course, it's a huge regulatory process in the EU with Fit for 55. There are a few things. I think one is state aid regulation that can make a huge difference. Not every economy has the same approach to market. Sweden is quite market-based. So there's a risk, of course, if countries like Germany and France subsidize industries, and then you have a market-based economy here, that can create distortions in the market. Then when it comes to carbon contracts for different schemes, that needs to be regulated at the EU level to, again, not distort the market. Then you have a great opportunity with the Innovation Fund. So that needs to be channeled, and we should also make sure that we have a level playing field also, in the Central Europe and Eastern European countries. So Innovation Fund plays a role. And one more thing I think we haven't been so good in Europe is startups, and we are good in innovation and technology, but many startups, we need a lot of innovation in this space, and many startups just ended up being bought by US or Asian buyers. We don't keep them, we don't help them scale up. So I think it's good time to look at clean technology together, and lawmakers to sort of design regulations that address that innovation, that missing piece in innovation. So that's my point. I think that's where we can achieve greater coordination.
Thank you. Henrik?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. As coming from a small country, Sweden, I think if every country goes after their sort of own industry supporting it, I don't think it will be for the benefit for the European sort of community. So I think it has to be done in a coordinated way.
Okay.
I think that also the customer will steer a lot. I can see that from our French customers. They are happy to see that the energy comes from renewable, from nuclear as well. Our German customers, not.
Yeah.
The Swedish customers, not. So I think it will also, from a customer perspective, be a little bit different priority, just like Dr. Kaufmann is into that. I think that our second project, which will be in Spain and Portugal, together with Iberdrola, it's a little bit different conditions. So I think now is the time to look at Europe as one powerhouse and see where do we do different things. One thing to finish up with something positive for Germany is that I think that with the industrial powerhouse of Germany, all these electrolyzers that needs to be built will mainly come from the German industry.
Okay, so
hopefully.
I think that the technology level and the quality and the industrial know-how, that's going to be a gigantic industry.
Okay, so thank you very much. That was the final word of the first panel. So we have 5 minutes of coffee break, and then you will stay here because all the other panelists are virtual, apart from Boris Ghake. We had the hope for two being present, but then Corona came between us and them, but they are still present on the screen. So thank you for the time being. 5 minutes of break, and then back here.
Thank you so much. So welcome to part 2 of our discussion, H2 and the geopolitical implications of the transition from fossil to green energy. And I'm very happy to welcome Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, for our short interview here today and also for the discussion later on. We have to do it virtually, but nevertheless, I'm really happy to have you here. Thanks, Gauri. Gauri has experience of over 30 years in policy formulation, implementation, and policy advocacy in the field of renewable energy, sustainable development and livelihoods. She has inter alia worked at the federal level of the government of India, particularly in the fields of renewable and new energies. But we also asked her to be part of our discussion today because IRENA has published already several reports on our question here today. The latest one beginning of this year, it's Geopolitics of the Energy Transformation, the Hydrogen Factor. So let's jump right into it, Gauri. So in the last 5 weeks, a lot has changed with the war Putin is waging in Ukraine. Your report was published before. One of the many consequences that the war has brought to us is that the geopolitics of energy moved into the public eye. A lot of the public now has realized that the interdependencies, so basically that in general and for a long time were deemed to be a good thing, you know, because it would contribute to stable relations between states, as the cost of conflicts would be high for all sides involved. So those interdependencies include the word itself, dependencies. On the energy side, this poses a problem right now for Germany, but for many other countries too. So this leads to my first question, basically. We heard a little bit in the first part of the discussion, but in your report too, you predict a regionalization of trade relations, and then Europe, as well as Asia, will be leaders in demand. And do you see the risk of new dependencies coming up for the H2 business? Over to you, Gauri.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today evening. And, you know, it's really a pleasure for me to share some of the insights of the recent work that IRENA has done on the geopolitics of hydrogen. So let me actually take us to what the current play is in the space of hydrogen. Currently, really, you know, it's the trade in hydrogen is very local. And even as costs of renewable energy are falling, and we've been seeing this declining trend, but the cost of transporting hydrogen still remains very high. Because when you're talking about transporting hydrogen, you're looking at either moving it through pipelines or by shipping into long distances. And that remains quite high. And it also depends on, you know, how much one can do with repurposing the current pipelines. So our sense is that the kind of bilateral deals that we are seeing happening pretty much across the globe, where, you know, there are relationships for hydrogen trading that are getting established between partners that were not traditionally partners in, you know, the energy trade. That really gets us to think that, you know, the relationship that will evolve around hydrogen-related technologies, molecules, or even even looking at the renewable energy flows going between countries, will be much more regional than we expected. But I also think that we should not be looking at this as creating new dependencies, but rather opportunities to hedge the risk and nurture trade relationship with new partners, because there are 30 odd countries that have come out with strategies on exporting and importing hydrogen. So it does open up the space quite a bit.
Okay, thank you very much. So some positive aspects here already, like the regionalization opportunities, which is for me on my positive part as being a diplomat. I love to hear that. But also on the first part of the discussion, so Hendrik, for example, already alluded to security aspects, and Götzi also about higher prices of H2 now, according to because of the Ukraine crisis. So that means some of the well-known risks, and you alluded to it, transport is still important. So some of the well-known risks remain for H2, like transport risks. So what do you see beyond that immediate repercussions that we see with higher prices already, despite the low scale of trade right now? What kind of other dangers or negative repercussions do you see by the war or from the war in Ukraine for H2 trade?
So let me put it like this, that, well, there are some of the risks, the security risk and all, but what we should be mindful of is that if you're looking at the technical potential of green electricity and, therefore also of green hydrogen, it pretty much exceeds the global demand by, several orders of magnitude. So, as I just said, there are many countries that have declared the ambition to become exporters of hydrogen, which in a sense limits the likelihood of export concentration. If you're looking at countries like Chile, Morocco, and Namibia, which were really not in the energy space earlier, have now come up with very ambitious strategies. So my sense is that the risks that we're looking at are more likely to be in the field of whether this technical potential can actually be realized, because this will really depend on the cost of capital, the state of infrastructure, the access to technology, and that those will be the bigger risks which we will see unfolding and have to be addressed as we move forward in this decade.
Okay, thank you very much. And we talked about the regional trade, and you alluded to Namibia or Chile. So do you see possible shifts or also continuity in economic or political influence resulting from H2 trade?
If I speak about the region that I'm currently in, which is the Middle East, and I do see that many of the current exporters of energy are making a pivot to clean hydrogen to develop the export potential further. And this is very interesting because they see that they can leverage the existing infrastructure, the existing know-how they have in the energy trade and the existing trade relationship, but also the workforce, the technical workforce that they have available. So while we do think that the blue hydrogen might seem like a natural fit, but we are also seeing many of the fossil fuel exporting countries to go directly to green hydrogen. And to give an example, of the UAE, which has come out with its hydrogen leadership roadmap, it's actually looking at this dual approach. So are Australia, so is Saudi Arabia, and so is Oman. So there seems to be a sense that while there will be new players who will come in and who will actively get engaged in this because of their availability of renewable energy, cheap renewable energy, and water, and also very strong government intent behind it. But what you're also seeing is how the existing players in the energy are making this pivot for clean hydrogen.
Okay, thank you very much. And as we're in Sweden here, a natural question is, do you see specific aspects for Sweden and Germany in the whole trade here from a geopolitical perspective?
So I think the discussion just before this was very insightful in terms of the technology leadership that Europe has, the technology leadership in green steel that Sweden has, and naturally these are going to play a very important role as we move forward. But let me just say here that while renewable energy is obviously a large part of the value chain of hydrogen, but then so is the electrolyzers and fuel cells, which we think will be a very large market, and we're expecting it to be for electrolyzers anything in the range of 50 to 60 billion US dollars, and by middle of the century. So China, Europe, and Japan have developed a head start in this and have started producing electrolyzers. So this is a very strong foundation on which future strategies can be built. But then the market is still very nascent, and particularly we feel that this market will grow depending on the kind of access you have for capital and also the government intent around it. But the one more point that I want to say is that EU definitely it seems to be emerging as a key import market, and it has already stated its ambition to denominate its hydrogen imports in euros. So the currencies and the pricing mechanisms that really take hold in this emerging market are going to have a big impact on the geopolitics. And I think the likelihood of that currency becoming a global benchmark are very big. So clearly there are big stakes in how the market shapes, and I think both Germany and Sweden have very large stakes in it.
Thank you very much. You kind of already alluded to the ambition of the European Union and also technological dominance, and also a little bit what role the European Union can play here or in Europe as a whole. So could you elaborate maybe a little bit more on how that can be used for the good of all? I mean, we maybe in shaping the rules, and also which rivals are there on the business level, of course, but also, for rivals for political influence, maybe?
So, I mean, we feel that a diverse hydrogen market will reduce the supply chain risks and improve energy security for all. But that is something that will come into or it'll evolve only if we find that there is developing countries are also brought in and provided access to technology, to training and capacity building, and also affordable finance to be able to really reach the kind of potential that we foresee for hydrogen. So I think there is a huge scope, and we've seen Germany take the leadership in how the PV sector grew by really taking on a very high level of cost at the beginning, but then that's what led to the emergence of the solar market that we see now. So I think that's something that we see will also unfold for hydrogen. And in any case, it's in all our interest to have a diversified ecosystem coming around hydrogen.
Okay, Gauri, thank you so much. Unfortunately, the 15 minutes are already over, but you will stay here for the discussion, and I'm sure that there are many more questions. So I hand over to Jockel, to Joachim.
Thank you very much to you both. And now joining us virtually are Professor Mencke, who is coming from the University of Trier. He is a professor for energy technique. In 2007, he was distinguished by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, for his role in that panel, which then received the Nobel Prize. So very warm welcome to you, Professor Mencke. And then as a second panelist is Mattias Eriksson, Director for Strategic Development at the Swedish Energy Agency. And I think Gauri has already mapped out a bit how this world can look like with H2. So for me, sometimes if I try to understand how important players are, I have the map of the New Yorker in my mind. So you see like Manhattan, and then a long time you see nothing. And probably if you have the New Yorker's view, then Sweden and Germany are not so much on the map. So how will the H2 New Yorker view will look like? That could be one question. And of course, what will be the respective role of Sweden and Germany in that regard? But these are only two elements of questions that I would pose. But first you have the possibilities to comment, Gauri. I think we should start with Professor Mencke. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome from my side. I had prepared some slides, but actually the colleagues already, especially Mr. Kaufmann and Gauri, already said more or less the points from my slides. I would like to comment from the following point. I'm currently involved in national strategies for hydrogen in around 25 countries, where we do a lot of training, particularly in developing countries. And I think what we need to look at in this is we need to ensure that these are part of an integrated energy transition, because what I came across that in many countries, national energy planners think, oh, we're gonna get new oil, we're gonna produce gas, we will export that green hydrogen to Europe, but we're gonna continue to run our fossil power plants. Let's take Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which want to do some renewable energies, but in principle by 2030, they still have 88% of their power supply from conventional fuels. So what they put up in renewables will be for exporting green hydrogen. So I think what we from Europe needs to make very clear, and I think Dr. Kaufmann and the EU knows very well about the additionality criteria, we need to ensure that we have an integrated part of energy transition in these countries. And that means massive deployment of renewables. Otherwise, we're going to get a situation where countries putting up renewables, producing green products, exporting these green products, but their own energy transition will not be part of it. And then I think we have not achieved our objective. So this is one of the things I would like to highlight. The other point is the war by Ukraine, what's happening right now there. I think this makes it very clear that finally only the renewables will be the solution. And therefore, I believe, like some of the other speakers, that this will definitely give the real push to have an over the sectors all renewable energy movement, not only for the electricity side, but as well for the things what we see right now in Europe, especially in Germany, the dependency of gas. So therefore, my main point is, like Gauri says, it offers many possibilities to get different players and give new entrance opportunities for other countries, smaller ones, bigger ones. But from the European perspective, we need to give a comprehensive support to these countries that they understand that it is an overall energy transition they need to undertake, and not only putting up some PV, not connecting to the grid, producing some hydrogen, and then exporting that hydrogen. So that would be maybe my first point on this, giving the word to the next speaker.
Eriksson.
Yeah, thank you very much. To be honest, I'm on the same page there. I think it's important to bear in mind what is, the major driving forces for green hydrogen or fossil-free hydrogen, both in Sweden, Europe, and elsewhere around the globe. And that is, increased awareness of climate change issues, and that these needs to be tackled, and they needs to be tackled quickly. So I think that is the most important driving force for hydrogen, but there are others as well. When we developed the Swedish hydrogen strategy, we took a rather close look at those who were publicly available at that time. And as I think some of the previous speakers said, it's almost or roughly 30 strategies available out there. But it's quite important to take a close look at them and see what other driving forces there are as well. And one is, of course, diversity of energy supply. It's always been important, and it's going to become even more important, not especially because of the war in Ukraine. So diversity of energy supply is important. I think it's going to have geopolitical consequences as well. But then, except from that, we have economic growth. We have technical R&D and innovation. We have obviously the question about importing and exporting of green hydrogen and fossil-free products. And then, of course, integration of renewable energy. And all of these driving forces is going to be important, and in some way or the other, there's going to be geopolitical consequences, of course.
Okay, then thank you for this first intervention. I look at the former panel, whether there are first comments already on what you've heard. Otherwise, I would ask Gori, when I looked through the IRENA paper, then living here in Sweden, I have the feeling Sweden is a front runner on H2. If I look to my left, then I think that is stressed that Sweden is very much forward going, has lots of very impressive projects. But in your paper, at least the one that I saw, Sweden was not really on the map. And my question was, is that due to the fact that there was no hydrogen strategy yet? Or is it seen from your perspective, what we see here in Sweden, not so impressive after all? And the second question would go again to Professor Mencke. When you say countries like Saudi Arabia, they should have their own energy transition, and we should work in that direction. Then my question to you, and of course to the others here in the room, would be how to do that. It's of course a sovereign country, so what are the incentives for Saudi Arabia to make that shift as well? So first to Gori, and then to Professor Mencke, and then to anybody who would like to have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So, the report that we've done is really trying to bring together the strategies that governments have put out, or the bilateral diplomacy that is moving forward on the hydrogen space. I think Sweden has done enormous amount of work, and it's really rests with the private sector, the kind of work that's going on, and the initiatives that they're participating in. But if you see the tenor of what we've put out in the report, it's much more to do with the diplomatic efforts that are ongoing, and how we see the shift that will happen in terms of where countries would be, whether in importing or exporting of green hydrogen.
Okay. And that would be probably the second question then to Mattias Eriksson, is how much hydrogen diplomacy is in store, or is it just not necessary because you have enough hydrogen here, so why should you be active then on the diplomatic floor? So back to Mattias Eriksson.
It's hard to say, to be honest, but I think that Sweden is in a quite fortunate situation. We do have plenty of renewable electricity to begin with. We have a decent electricity net, and we have a rather good potential for additional renewable electricity. So in that sense, we are fortunate, but the demand for hydrogen in Sweden is likely to be rather big. So in that sense, you cannot exclude the need for import, but obviously there is, at least currently, a lack of infrastructure in Sweden. We do not have any pipelines, for example. So in the long run, I think we will see additional business models. And then when it comes to export, I think there will be an interest from Swedish companies to export hydrogen as well. For sure, there will be an export of fossil-free products, and then we also seen a beginning of cooperation between some countries, at least within the Nordic part of the world, and regarding hydrogen, and I think there will be more to come in the near future. So, for example, it could be common investments in infrastructure between some of the countries. And I also think that there is one thing in the short term, but then as the infrastructure starts to develop, I think, as I said, there will be other business models as well. So it's going to be an interesting 5 to 15 years.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now to Professor Mencke with the Saudi Arabia question, and then to Sean here in the room for next intervention. But first to Professor Mencke.
Thank you very much. I think we have two kind of groups of countries. Of course, we have the classical developing countries where the support needs to go to build up a power system at first, to supply the power to their own people, build up ownership of this. The other group are the countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where they have declared a net zero vision until 2060. For example. And now I think the task is to support them and assist them in putting up a roadmap to achieve it. Because one thing is to say we're going to be net zero by 2060. The second point is to start operating like countries like, Sweden, you're already far ahead, but even Germany has now a real roadmap how they want to achieve the decarbonization. And we need to support these countries in an alignment between the production of green hydrogen, whether it's for export, but in parallel, supporting them that decarbonization of their power system is important to achieve the net zero vision, because otherwise it remains a vision somewhere in the gray area, while the activities are not aligned with this. And this is what I mean. We need to support and make sure that within these countries, this discussion is supported. Of course, we cannot give any direct recommendation to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but we can make sure that the roadmaps are coming up. Otherwise, I would say as well that Sweden is, of course, in a very fortunate situation, having this renewable energy sources, having the natural mineral resources, while Germany is most likely in a very different position, being a country where the manufacturing of products is quite strong. And I would say what has been done in the PV module sector in a certain way, I think Germany can contribute with helping to set up these electrolyzer manufacturing thing, which is already ongoing, which I really think will be a good contribution to the whole development.
Thank you so much, Professor Mencke. And now to Sean Williams from Mundus. That's perhaps a kind of newspaper, newsletter that not everybody knows in the world, but for us as diplomats here in Sweden, it's one of the most important sources of our daily life. So thank you for being here, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And in addition to our diplomacy newsletter that we put out every day, we have a free publication for all Nordic Green news. So if you're interested in following that, please let me know, and I'll make sure that you get the details. What's an incredible missing word in this conversation? I don't know exactly who to put this question to. I think, Gauri, I'd love to hear your perspective, but I think even to some practitioners who are like Henrik, who are dealing with this on a day-to-day level, I think if I've heard the countries mentioned here, and even to my country, Australia, but the country I haven't heard its name mentioned at all is America. And to have a question about geopolitics without discussing the role of America. And I think we all probably understand at one level why that is. We have an America that's flip-flopping between quite right-wing and then sort of centrist or even left-wing government, and you get this instability of policy, and if you have a look at what Biden is trying to achieve in Congress, but maybe not having such great achievements, it makes it hard for them to project the normal political and geopolitical strength that they have. So the question is, how does the rest of the world, and Europe in particular, deal with that, and how do you have long-term geopolitical discussions when probably the most serious actor is not there?
Okay, thank you so much, Sean. Then you addressed Gauri. I guess that Stefan Kaufmann might as well have a comment on that. So first to Gauri.
You're absolutely right, and I think it's a difficult situation because when you're looking at America, we find that sometimes you probably need to also look at how the states are putting their policies together, and that's where you do see a lot of action happening. For example, in the state of California and some of the other states that are really moving forward with this. But you're right. I mean, unless you have the US also as a important player in terms of how the geopolitics will develop, this will be a conversation that's I would say is not completely balanced without them. But for the time being, I think we definitely are seeing much more action at the state level rather than at the federal level.
So far, from my point of view, it could be interesting for technological cooperation, like Japan or South Korea, because we have the same interests and the same capacities. I went to Canada last year because Canada announced to become one of the 3 biggest hydrogen export countries in the world. And I went to Quebec to have a closer look. So the Quebec government, it was not really that interested to export green hydrogen. And if you see the big demand on the Canadian industry in hydrogen, and you see that Alberta is very based on fossil fuels, and they want to produce blue hydrogen for Asia, like Australia. The eastern part of Australia wants to produce blue hydrogen for Asia. So at the end, I left Canada, and I see it's really difficult, also in Quebec, because they have some green renewable capacities in water, but it's very expensive to have another additional 35 gigawatt on hydropower. So at the end, I am very skeptical if Canada will really become a world-leading hydrogen export country, to be honest. And and looking to the United States, I think we should talk to them for technological corporations. I think there are some strong companies, waste to hydrogen, for example, or electrolyzer companies or fuel cell companies. So, but I don't see United States what is interesting for us as an export country for green hydrogen.
Do you see from a sort of end customer perspective interest from American corporations?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if you can hear me now, but you can hear me good. So yes, we see demand both from European global brands who need to transform the European supply chain. I think that's one channel which is pushing on based on these science-based targets that we talked about before. But we're also seeing signs, and we have signed contracts with pure American players who sees the demand for green steel. So I think that, yes, I believe it's coming. The other thing is that I agree with Gary's comment before also, that I think you need to look at it from a state perspective, go down to the different states. That's what we have seen as well. And when you start aggregating the number of sort of funded projects, not sort of only announced, but where there's funds allocated to it, we have seen that, at least in our own studies, that they are keeping the same pace as Europe, actually, in announcing projects for green hydrogen. But it's very sort of concentrated to California, to Illinois, to Minnesota, and a few others, and that's where it's happened.
Maybe I can also add to that. I mean, there's still, we shouldn't forget, there's still great partnership between the US and EU, especially in developing countries. The South Africa Just Transition Deal is a great example where we saw sort of US coming back to the climate scene. And I think there will be many of those in the coming years. I hear that there will be more of those just transition partnerships, and that can make a big difference for countries. But I also have a question. I think about Iceland. I don't know if you had any conversations with them, because I think it's an interesting country. It's one of those safe locations like Sweden, where you have backup capacity, not just wind and solar, because you know they're intermittable. But Iceland, I don't know if you had any conversations.
I will visit Iceland 11th of May. But I heard that it's a little bit difficult. There's a lot of potential, like Ireland or Scotland, but the people there seems to be a little bit reluctant in producing renewable or green hydrogen to export, because they want to save a little bit. That's what I heard about Iceland. But there's a cooperation with the Harbour of Hamburg, for example, agreement. But yeah, I will have a closer look 11th of May then, and also to Scotland beginning of May. And I visited Ireland, and we are signing an agreement the next days also with Ireland.
I was in the middle of a peaceful protest against exports when they were discussing whether to join the EU legislative process.
Professor Menke.
Yeah, the question concerning the US, I think what is important is even more how China is within or without. As I already said earlier, and Gauri said, the PV development, module development was mainly driven by a few countries. Here in the hydrogen new world, we have Europe and we have Japan as the two major demand centers, which are going to need it for their survival. Let's put it this way. While other countries can sit a little bit more on the backside. Even the US is not in that pressure right now to see where they get their energy from. So therefore, they're sitting a little bit more at the side. While other countries who are getting into the export of the products, whether it's Chile, Australia. But I think for the success and for the cost regression of hydrogen, the development in China, and from my experience is that China is looking very closely what's going on with the technology development. They are very active in developing electrolyzers. They will be not an exporter. They will be most likely an even importer. So this will drive the market, particularly in Asia. And I think this will as well be another push to develop this hydrogen economy. So, and then I'm sure the US, especially certain states like California and others, will join the train as well. But it is not a hindering at this moment that they are not at the forefront of this technology development at this moment as a state.
Now I'm asking whether there are more questions from either the virtual world or here in the room. If that is not the case, then I would just ask once more the panel with the request for a short answer. Is then, from your perspective, of course it's speculative and it's the future and always difficult to foresee, but is this kind of a different energy world with hydrogen as one part for photovoltaic, the other with a possible leapfrogging in parts of the third world, something which geopolitically makes things easier? Will it be a bit more equal world than before, or is that a too optimistic, naive view? First to Gauri.
Well, thank you for that question. I think, when you talk energy transition, you are not just looking at fuel replacement. That's of course one part of it, but what will also come along with it will be political, economic, environmental disruptions and technological disruptions. So you are looking at not a transition that will, go it'll have its own challenges. Let me put it like this: it'll have its own challenges, and clearly, what we hope to see is that because the way the renewable potential of renewable energy is distributed the world over, we do hope to see the transition actually leading to a better equilibrium in terms of countries becoming self-sufficient in energy, and also a trading happening to the best advantage of the bilateral partners that come with it.
Thank you, Gauri. Then to Professor Menke.
Thank you for the chance. I believe as well that if hydrogen is part of an overall energy transition in each country, then it has a chance. But that includes as well ownership for the people in the countries. And it requires that each country or region develop really a strategy which looks to the overall development of their society, not only focusing on exporting some new kind of fuel to other countries. And I think if we support these countries, and in this way it will be a good chance, because it diversifies the supply and it helps to achieve the net zero target. I mean, that is one of the reasons why we are doing this undertaking.
Thank you. And then to Matthias Eriksson.
Thank you. Well, it's a very, very difficult question and hard to tell, but in my view, I think that hydrogen opens up new opportunities for some countries. Leapfrogging could be possible for some, but at least I think it gives them access to a new technology to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. So that's a positive thing. I think it's quite interesting to see that there are countries who you usually don't mention when it comes to energy export that do come into play when we talk about hydrogen.
I think that we will see not only the impact of maybe where the green hydrogen is produced, and I think if we solve some of the storage questions and get the cost down for storage, I think it might also rewrite the maps of where industries are located and the logic for that. I think that's one thing. The other thing is that foreseeing the cost of transport for hydrogen and sort of complexity of storage in hydrogen and how that pushes up the user's cost of the green hydrogen, I think we will see a stronger regionalization as well. So I think we will see regional sort of clusters of green hydrogen, and less of this may be global trade of sending it, at least for the coming 10 to 15 years. And I think Europe is well positioned there. We work together.
If there's no other comment, then this is nearly the last word of the second panel today, and it's a positive one. And I can absolutely go along with that, because before coming here to Sweden, hydrogen was not very much on my personal agenda. And then we had the state visit here of our president in September. And of course, he was in Kiruna at 𝐾𝐫, looking at hybrid. He was at Scania, and there he had very close links to H2 Green Steel and as well to Northvolt. And you see here that some of these kind of it looks a bit like a dream at first hand, put into practice in very high speed, and what your profession is each day. And if you look at the figures that you're talking about, how much investment goes into the marketing, about the ramping up, then you see that we are much farther than words and ideas, but we are really already in the implementation stage, which is something which is impressive, I find. Question always is whether we woke up early enough, probably not, but how much repercussions that will have, and how much time we'll have, how we can speed up our bureaucracies ourselves to make that happen. And of course, there's always a balancing between very difficult interests. So environment and climate change sometimes are not in the same place, and you have to find the good solutions to that. But from preparing to these panels here and from listening to you, I think we have gone already quite a long way, which is very positive. And thank you for all your work to get us further, because it's work not only for yourselves but for our future. So thank you for participating. Those now in the virtual world, we say goodbye from here, and those here in the room can grab something to drink, and then we even have dinner afterwards. So thank you.